Memphis, Tennessee, December 4th, 1955. The winter air cuts sharp through the city streets as two young men slip through the back entrance of Sun Records after midnight. One is Elvis Presley, already causing tremors throughout the music industry. The other is Johnny Cash, a struggling musician who's only been recording for 6 months. They're not supposed to be here. Sam Phillips is out of town. The studio is officially closed. But what they're about to create in the next 3 hours will be so powerful, so controversial, so ahead of its time that it will be locked away in a vault for 4 decades. Industry executives will deny its existence. Record label lawyers will ensure it never sees daylight. And the two men who created it will take a solemn oath never to speak of what happened that night. This is the story of the recording that was too explosive for the world to hear, until the world was finally ready. The year 1955 had been a whirlwind for both young musicians, but for very different reasons. Elvis Presley was ascending at a pace that defied belief, his unique sound creating pandemonium wherever he performed. Teenage girls screamed until they fainted. Conservative adults condemned him as a threat to moral decency. Radio stations either banned his records or played them on endless repeat. He was simultaneously the most loved and most hated performer in America. Johnny Cash was fighting a different battle entirely. His first single, Hey Porter, had shown promise, but he was struggling to find his distinctive voice in an industry that seemed to have room for only one revolutionary at a time. Sam Phillips at Sun Records believed in him, but the public hadn't yet caught fire the way they had for Elvis. Cash was haunted by the feeling that time was running out, that his window of opportunity might close before he could prove himself worthy of it. The two musicians had crossed paths several times at Sun Records, but always in passing, always in the controlled environment of scheduled sessions or business meetings. There was mutual respect, but also an unspoken tension. They represented different sides of the same musical revolution. Elvis as the explosive frontman who grabbed headlines. Cash as the thoughtful songwriter who preferred shadows to spotlights. But on that December night, something brought them together for a collaboration that no one had planned, no one had authorized, and no one would officially acknowledge for the next 40 years. The exact circumstances that led to their secret session remain mysterious. Some say Elvis had been driving aimlessly through Memphis, unable to sleep, when he noticed lights still burning at Sun Records. Others claim Johnny Cash had a key to the studio and was there working on new material when Elvis arrived unexpectedly. The most intriguing theory suggests they had planned this meeting deliberately, both feeling constrained by the commercial pressures surrounding their official recording sessions. What is certain is that by 1 a.m. on December 5th, both musicians were inside Studio A at Sun Records, with no engineer, no producer, and no record company executive to oversee what they were creating. The tape machine was running, capturing everything in raw, unfiltered form. And what it captured would ultimately be judged too dangerous for public consumption. The session began innocently enough. Johnny Cash was working through some new songs, playing his guitar and experimenting with different vocal approaches. When Elvis arrived, the atmosphere was relaxed, almost casual. They talked about the pressures of the music business, the strange sensation of suddenly being in the public eye, the challenge of staying true to their artistic vision while satisfying commercial demands. "Sometimes I feel like a performing monkey," Elvis confided as he picked up a guitar and began tuning it. "Everyone wants me to do exactly what I did last time, but bigger, louder, more shocking." "At least they want you to do something," Johnny replied with a rueful laugh. "Half the time I feel invisible." It was that shared sense of isolation, of being misunderstood by the very industry that was promoting them, that created the foundation for what would follow. Two young men who had become symbols of musical rebellion discovered they were more similar than different, more vulnerable than their public images suggested, more thoughtful about their art than anyone realized. As the night progressed, their conversation evolved into musical collaboration. They began playing songs for each other, not polished performances, but raw, emotional interpretations that revealed aspects of their artistry that rarely surfaced in official recordings. Johnny Cash showed Elvis some songs he'd written but never recorded. Songs too personal, too political, too dark for the commercial market. Elvis shared vocal techniques and performance approaches that he'd never displayed publicly, revealing a depth and range that his hit records only hinted at. Then something extraordinary happened. They began creating new material together, improvising lyrics and melodies that drew on their shared experiences of sudden fame, artistic pressure, and the strange isolation that came with being constantly in the public eye. What emerged was music unlike anything either had recorded before. More honest than Elvis's commercial releases, more explosive than Johnny's careful studio work. The songs they created that night dealt with themes that were considered taboo in 1950s popular music. They sang about the cost of fame, the artificial nature of celebrity, the way the music industry consumed young talent. They explored questions about identity, authenticity, and the price of success that wouldn't become mainstream topics in popular music for another decade. But it was one particular song, a duet that lasted nearly 8 minutes, that crossed lines no one in 1955 was prepared to cross. The lyrics addressed issues of racial injustice, economic inequality, and social hypocrisy with a directness that was unprecedented in mainstream American music. Elvis and Johnny took turns singing verses that challenged not just musical conventions, but social ones, creating something that was simultaneously a work of art and a political manifesto. The power of that performance was immediately evident to both musicians. When the song ended, they sat in silence for several minutes, recognizing that they had created something that could change the trajectory of popular music if it were ever released. But they also understood that releasing it could destroy their careers. "We can't let anyone hear this," Johnny finally said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and fear. "Not yet," Elvis agreed. "Maybe someday the world will be ready for it, but not now." They spent the remaining hours of the session recording several more songs, each one pushing boundaries in different ways. Some challenged musical conventions, experimenting with structures and arrangements that wouldn't become standard for years. Others tackled lyrical themes that were considered inappropriate for mainstream entertainment. All of them revealed aspects of both musicians that their public images carefully concealed. By dawn, they had created nearly 4 hours of recorded material. But they had also created a problem. What should they do with recordings that were too revolutionary for their time, too controversial for their careers, too valuable to destroy, but too dangerous to preserve? The solution they devised would remain secret for 4 decades. They made a pact that night, sealing the master tapes in a container and hiding them in a location known only to the two of them. Neither would speak of the session publicly. Neither would hint at its existence in interviews or autobiographies. The music they had created would remain buried until they both agreed it was safe to reveal. But keeping such a secret proved more difficult than either had anticipated. Over the years, both musicians would occasionally reference that night obliquely in interviews, speaking of lost sessions or experiments that never saw light. Industry insiders began to whisper about mysterious recordings that supposedly existed somewhere. containing collaborations between major artists that had never been officially released. The rumors persisted through the decades, fueled by occasional hints dropped by people who claimed to have knowledge of secret recording sessions. Some said the tapes had been destroyed. Others insisted they were hidden in a bank vault, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The stories became part of music industry folklore, impossible to verify, but too persistent to dismiss. Meanwhile, both Elvis and Johnny Cash went on to achieve levels of success that neither could have imagined. That December night in 1955, Elvis became the king of rock and roll, transforming popular culture and influencing generations of musicians. Johnny Cash evolved into the Man in Black, a voice of conscience and authenticity in an increasingly commercial industry. But for those who knew them well, there was always a sense that something important was being held back, that their public output, however impressive, represented only part of their artistic potential. Close friends and collaborators sometimes caught glimpses of a deeper creativity, a willingness to take risks and explore difficult territory that rarely surfaced in their commercial releases. The secret session had established a template for both musicians that would influence their entire careers. Elvis would occasionally disappear into studios for private sessions where he experimented with gospel, blues, and country music in ways that his commercial image wouldn't accommodate. Johnny Cash would retreat to his home studio to create deeply personal recordings that he never intended to release, using music as a form of private therapy rather than public entertainment. As the years passed, the weight of keeping such a significant artistic achievement secret began to take its toll. Both musicians had created something they were genuinely proud of, something that represented their artistic vision in its purest form. Yet they couldn't share it with the world, couldn't allow it to influence other musicians, couldn't receive credit for what may have been their most innovative work. The situation became more complicated as social attitudes began to change. The themes that had made their 1955 recordings too controversial for release gradually became mainstream concerns. The civil rights movement brought discussions of racial injustice into the public sphere. The counterculture movement of the 1960s made anti-establishment sentiments commercially viable. The political upheavals of the late 1960s and early 1970s created audiences hungry for music that challenged social conventions. Both musicians began to realize that the recording they had hidden might finally have found its moment. But by then, other complications had emerged. Elvis's career was managed by Colonel Parker, who was notoriously protective of his client's image and resistant to any activities that might threaten Elvis's commercial viability. Johnny Cash had signed with major record labels that had contractual rights to his recordings and would likely demand ownership of any previously unreleased material. The legal and commercial obstacles to releasing the secret session seemed insurmountable. Even if both musicians agreed to reveal their collaboration, the multiple parties who now had stakes in their careers would likely prevent it from ever reaching the public. The recording had become not just an artistic statement, but a complex legal and financial puzzle that no one seemed willing to solve. Then came the tragedies that would forever change the calculus surrounding the hidden recordings. Elvis Presley died in 1977, taking with him half of the secret pact that had kept the session buried for over 20 years. Johnny Cash was suddenly the sole guardian of an artistic legacy that had been created collaboratively, but was now his responsibility alone. The loss of Elvis forced Johnny Cash to confront difficult questions about artistic responsibility and historical preservation. Did he have the right to continue keeping the recording secret when his collaborator was no longer able to participate in that decision? Did the historical significance of the material outweigh the personal commitments he had made? Would revealing the session honor Elvis's memory or betray his trust? For nearly 20 more years, Johnny Cash wrestled with these questions, while the rumors about the secret session continued to circulate. Music historians began serious investigations into the claims, tracking down studio personnel who had worked at Sun Records in the 1950s, interviewing musicians who had been part of the Memphis scene, searching for any concrete evidence that such a collaboration had actually occurred. The breakthrough came in the mid-1990s, when Johnny Cash, facing his own mortality and increasingly concerned about his artistic legacy, finally decided that the historical value of the recordings outweighed the personal commitments that had kept them secret. Working with a small team of trusted associates, he began the delicate process of locating the master tapes and determining how they could be responsibly released. The challenge wasn't just finding the recordings, it was navigating the complex web of legal rights, estate permissions, and contractual obligations that had accumulated over 4 decades. Multiple record labels claimed potential rights to any previously unreleased material by both artists. The Elvis Presley estate had to be consulted about permission to release material that could affect his legacy. Music industry lawyers had to research precedents for releasing recordings that had been deliberately suppressed for such extended periods. But perhaps the most significant challenge was determining whether the recordings lived up to their legendary reputation. 40 years of rumors and speculation had created almost impossible expectations. Could any recording, however innovative or controversial, justify 4 decades of secrecy and anticipation? When the tapes were finally located and played for a small group of music industry professionals, the reaction was immediate and unanimous. The recordings were everything the rumors had suggested and more. The musical collaboration between Elvis and Johnny Cash revealed aspects of both musicians that had never been captured in their official discographies. The controversial duet that had originally made the session too dangerous to release was recognized as a masterpiece of social commentary disguised as popular music. More importantly, the recordings provided insight into the creative processes and artistic vision of 2 musicians who had shaped American popular culture. The private conversation captured between songs revealed their thoughts about fame, artistry, and social responsibility in unprecedented detail. The musical experimentation demonstrated their willingness to push boundaries and take risks that their commercial careers hadn't allowed. The decision to finally release the recordings in 1995 created a sensation in the music industry and beyond. Critics hailed the material as a missing link in the history of American popular music, connecting the rebellious energy of early rock and roll with the socially conscious music that would emerge in the following decades. Fans of both artists gained new appreciation for their artistic depth and creative courage. But perhaps the most significant impact of the release was what it revealed about the constraints that commercial pressures place on artistic expression. The session demonstrated that both Elvis and Johnny Cash had been capable of creating more challenging, more innovative music than their official releases suggested. The 40-year delay in releasing the material highlighted how industry concerns about marketability and controversy could suppress artistic achievements of genuine historical importance. The story of the secret session became a cautionary tale about the relationship between art and commerce, creativity and caution, personal expression and public expectation. It showed how 2 young musicians had created something revolutionary but had been forced by the circumstances of their time to hide it from the world that most needed to hear it. Today, the 1955 session is recognized as one of the most significant musical collaborations in American history. Music scholars study it for insights into the creative processes of 2 legendary artists. Social historians examine it for evidence of how popular culture addressed social issues before such discussions became mainstream. Musicians continue to find inspiration in its willingness to challenge conventions and push boundaries. The recording that was once too explosive for the world to hear became, 40 years later, exactly what the world needed to understand the true artistic legacy of Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash. The secret they had kept so carefully was ultimately their gift to future generations. A reminder that the most important art often emerges not from commercial calculations, but from authentic collaboration between artists brave enough to tell difficult truths. The vault that had hidden their work for 4 decades was finally opened, and the music they had created in those early morning hours emerged to change our understanding of what popular music could be, what famous musicians were capable of, and what artistic courage actually means in practice.